On this episode of Two Broads Talking Politics, we speak with former Congresswoman Katie Hill about her new book, She Will Rise, and her PAC, HER Time. Hey everyone, this is Kelly with Two Broads Talking Politics, part of the Demcast family of podcasts, and I'm on today with my co-host Sophy. Hey Sophy.
Hey Kelly.
And we are very excited, a little bit fangirly even, to be joined today by Katie Hill, who is the author of a great new book that we'll talk about, and also the founder of the HER Time PAC. So hi Katie.
Hello. Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, we are very excited to have you on. So first of all, happy birthday.
Thank you. Thank you. It was a good day yesterday.
Yeah. So birthday, we've got Women's Equality Day. It's a good time here.
It is. It is.
And we're all ignoring the Republican convention.
Oh my gosh.
Makes it even better.
I had 2 nights of birthday celebration things, and so I was able to fully check out. And tonight I've got an event with the Commonwealth Club, so I'm keeping myself busy during all of these nights and just trying to ignore Twitter.
Excellent. So let's start with talking some about the book. So the book is called She Will Rise, came out just a couple of weeks ago, and It's fantastic. So tell us a little bit about what inspired you to write the book and sort of the audience that you're trying to reach with this.
Sure. Well, what inspired me? I mean, I think probably by this point, most people who are listening to your podcast know about my resignation last year, and the fact that it came after my ex-husband had released, naked pictures of me in conjunction with the right-wing media and with my Republican kind of political operatives in the district that were trying to take me out. And so, a lot of things contributed to the resignation, but ultimately I decided that the best thing for me to do would be to step down. And in kind of the aftermath of that, I felt like it was really important. And I said this in my resignation speech that I am not going to be in the halls of Congress anymore, but I am not giving up the fight. And if anything, what happened to me made me feel like I needed to double down on my efforts, but I didn't know what that would look like yet. So for writing the book, it actually served kind of a dual purpose. In one way, it actually helped me really process everything, the emotional aspects of everything that had happened, and also really just put into a structured, concrete plan how I can contribute moving forward, and that's really through the work of HER Time. And I kind of take us through on the book. I take us through the personal story, my own experiences, but how those are really reflective and examples of these almost universal experiences that women have that show that equality is still a long way off. And here we are 100 years from the time we got the right to vote. But we still have a lot of work to do. And when you talk about the audience, I want it to be a broad audience, but really, I think the people who have the biggest potential to be impacted are especially younger women. So I hope that this gets into the hands of, teen girls and younger women who can learn from it and be really inspired to take up the fight.
So I got to say, Sophy and I have read a lot of political memoir type books. We did a whole series of episodes where we reviewed the books of the presidential candidates. And
oh, nice.
And this is much more personal and moving. To be fair, they're all running for president, so they're trying to be careful. But I really like how you were able to sort of combine these deeply personal, emotional moments also with practical advice. And I think that's a tricky thing to do. I've seen a lot of books try to do it. What was sort of your process in writing this, figuring out how to sort of weave together anecdotal things about your family, but also this very real sort of, and this is what we do?
Yeah, it's a good question. I guess what I kind of had an idea in my head about what I wanted to I didn't want this just to be a memoir. So a lot of people ask me kind of like, are you going to write a memoir? And I'm like, I didn't feel like there was enough of a purpose for me to just talk about myself. I wanted it to translate into something actionable. And especially because I felt like that was the promise that I made by stepping down, was that this has to turn into something more. And so as I was outlining the book, and for me, I was actually an English major, so getting into politics ended up kind of, it was a strange turn of events in the first place. But so, for me, outlining and really kind of getting your thesis and the point you want to get across for each section of the book, each chapter, was a really important part of, of basically paving the way to be able to write everything else out. So it's almost like the narrative was that was much more natural. That kind of wove itself in just by, coming out of me as I knew the sort of the chapters that I wanted to hit, the experiences that I wanted to touch on, that I thought really contributed to factors that are keeping us from achieving true equality. So when you talk about workplace dynamics or pay equality or inequality and, our personal safety and domestic violence and those pieces that I know have touched my own life and that of my family. And actually the fact that my grandmother's story ended up becoming such a big part of the book was also unexpected. And I think it was a great learning experience for me in terms of how to approach writing if I decide to do this again.
Kelly had mentioned that you started HER Time. Can you tell us a little bit about HER Time and sort of what the PAC does, what kind of candidates it endorses?
Yeah. So when I stepped down, I had about $1 million in my reelection campaign fund. And I had a choice to either just leave it there in case I decide to run for something down the road, or I could turn it into to what I did, which is a political action committee. And by doing that, basically it converts all the money to resources that we can spend directly giving to candidates or on behalf of candidates to help them get elected. And the mission for HER Time is to elect more women, specifically young women and women of color, into offices of all levels. It started out kind of primarily focused on the congressional races, but we've also expanded it now to state legislative races, statewide races, and even some local races that are and we know we can have a bigger impact on. Because if you read the book, then it kind of all comes down to, we've got all these different policies that we can enact and that have, are evidence-based and have broad support. But if we don't have the right people in power, meaning if we don't have equal representation by women, for women, then we're not going to be able to get these things done. So it's all about, translating the kind of ideas in the book into action.
So you mentioned, or I mentioned, I don't know, somebody mentioned at the top that we're 100 years out from women getting the right to vote now. And you talk some in your book about Susan B. Anthony and those struggles that she went through and, and actually being arrested for voting. And, just recently, of course, Trump decided to pardon Susan B. Anthony. And it was pretty clear from reading what you wrote that's ridiculous that Susan B. Anthony would never wanted to have been pardoned for this. But can you talk a little bit about her story? And, it's clear that you feel some affinity for some of these sort of early warrior women in American politics.
Yeah. I mean, the thing that I think a lot of people might not even really remember, because we aren't taught a lot about this. Like there may be a day, if that, or a chapter of the women's suffrage movement as you're growing up in history class or whatever. I don't honestly remember learning much about it in school. So when I dove in for the research, but also just kind of as having like a hero or women figures to look up to, as when I was younger, there are only so many that you hear about. You've got like Joan of Arc and people like Susan B. Anthony that you've kind of peripherally learned about. And so as I wanted to learn more about her, I learned that she and her peers fought for this right to vote, and they died before it even happened. So they had to make these really incredible sacrifices to even get us further and further to get closer to that, such a basic right. And one of the stories that I really focus on in the book is how she and several of her her peers were actually arrested by, they successfully registered to vote, but she was pretty fierce, and she kind of scared these young men who were serving as election officials into allowing her to register under basically making the argument that the Constitution already provided for all people, all citizens, to have the right to vote. So they allowed her to register, and then she actually voted. And then 2 weeks later, she was arrested and tried. And the trial was a total mess. And the judge basically didn't even allow the jurors to make the decision. The judge forced them to, and just outright said that the jury must find her guilty. And I think it's just her response in that moment was one that I kind of really went into the details around, because it was just so powerful. And that was why when Trump pardoned her, it was so clear she wanted to be a martyr is not quite the right word, but she wanted to make a point that this is a fundamental injustice, that women would be held as criminals for executing a basic citizen's right in our democracy. And so when we're, as we're kind of moving forward in this and recognizing the sacrifices that were made and the fight that was undertaken by these women, then pardoning her is almost, in a way, it's acknowledging that, or it's sort of saying that it was a criminal act ever, which she, flatly rejected. And it's also saying that she, it takes away the fact that she was defiant in that act. So I wrote an op-ed about it too, once he did it. And, I think that it's a pretty important kind of reflection of how Trump is just totally clueless and likes to take symbols and use them for political purposes and regardless of their actual intent.
You said in several places, and I believe also in your book, that you don't want other young women to be dissuaded by your experience of having had to step down and having had your personal life used against you in the media. And you've started a PAC to start encouraging women to run for office. But then I'm thinking, how do there seems to be a tension between wanting to encourage women to run for office and then what they're actually seeing. I remember I read an interview with you in Fortune where you talked about feeling like a freedom now that you're not in office to be straight about what is going on in your life. And I'm wondering sort of how we negotiate that tension. How can we, encourage other younger women to run for office when they see what happens to women who actually attain that power, when they see sort of the damage that gets done to them?
Yeah. Well, the argument that I make throughout the book and when I talk to women who are considering running or who are running now, is that you are already a warrior in the fight for women's equality, whether you want to be or not, whether you think you are or not, you already are, because we're facing these struggles every single day. 1 in 3 women is statistically going to be sexually assaulted throughout her lifetime. The statistics around domestic violence are insane, and it's something that we really have to address on a fundamental level. The pay equality piece is impacting women and families to the point where, we're really in a lot of ways considered second-class citizens still, even, when lip service is paid to the fact that we, have equality, but it's just not true when it comes down to action and the way that things are implemented. So, my argument is that you're already experiencing the damages that are being done by us not having equality and not having equal representation. And so you are brave. You are a warrior by stepping up and saying that you're willing to run. And you have to know that these kinds of things can happen. But I guess the sort of lesson from what happened to me, and also what I think, I'm hoping by standing back up and saying, no, this isn't something that can take me down permanently, is that the next time something similar goes down with another woman who's in office, that she doesn't feel the need to resign. She feels like she's got the support and the kind of, I don't know, moral high ground to say, no, I'm a human. I make mistakes. And also I was a victim of something. I was not, this isn't my, my own failing. Right. So I think it is challenging, right? It's incredibly difficult for us to expect women to kind of undergo the public scrutiny and the crap that they have to deal with when they're running for office or elected to office. But we need them to, and it's a true public service, and it's a fight that really has to be fought.
I've been thinking a lot about how these things happen in politics, right? The personal scandals, things come up. And so often, especially sort of in the Me Too moment, we're sort of looking at these men making half apologies and saying, why can't they do better? And then other people saying, well, what would true accountability look like? What sort of response would we be happy with? And yet here you experience this thing where you were also a victim at the same time, and yet did give this wonderful, gracious response. And, I'm sort of in this moment where things like the Jerry Falwell situation are happening, and Aaron Coleman, and we're seeing men again get called out and not be able to respond. Like, what is it going to take to get true accountability from male politicians who are going through scandals? Like, how do we fix this double standard that exists, that clearly exists?
Well, the only thing that I can think of is that we really have to hold men to the same standard. And part of why I decided to step down, a big part of why I decided to step down, is that I did not want to be considered a hypocrite. And I didn't want to be the person who was, kind of forcing us as Democrats or us as progressives, or even us as women to say, well, it doesn't apply. These things that we're asking for don't apply in this case. And, I talk about in the book, and I've talked about in interviews, why I think my situation, why, I think that it's part of a gray area, and how I do acknowledge my responsibility in the matter, but how, I think there's a pretty big difference between like a Harvey Weinstein situation and what happened in mine. But I think that I still wanted to set an example of saying, I did something wrong by engaging in this power dynamic, and I'm sorry for it. And I wanted to show that you can accept that responsibility, but you also, it doesn't mean that you have to be banished, I guess, forever. If you take the responsibility and you try to kind of make amends for it by doing something positive, which is what I'm attempting to do with the PAC. So my, I think what we have to do for men is, an example with Aaron Coleman. I wrote an op-ed recently in the Daily Beast because, we see these progressive men who are defending him as opposed to saying that he should take the same kind of accountability. And there's this total, there is this total double standard. And I don't know how much of it is because he's a man or how much of it is because he had this, this particularly progressive agenda that he was running on, the Bernie Sanders bro kind of thing. But I think it's incredibly important that we continue to call that out. And as women in particular, we don't stand for it. We say that misogyny and this kind of behavior is something that we're not going to accept from within our own party. And it's not something that we're going to condone. And we do not expect the men who call themselves allies to do that either. But, also we can recognize that there's a gray area. We can recognize that people make mistakes in their past. And if they apologize, if they own it, if they take the responsibility and they're trying to do better with it, then, we should reflect on what we think is, can they contribute, whether it's in politics or otherwise. And I hope that the answer is ultimately yes. But if they won't even take that responsibility, if they try to brush it off, if they try to say that, Aaron Coleman, he's 19 years old. At first we just learned, I think today or yesterday, that he had a much more recent and horrible instance of, violently attacking his ex-girlfriend just within the last year. But before that, he had severely bullied and, committed cyber exploitation against several young girls when he was 14 years old. That's 5 years ago. And he didn't really have any consequences for it. And he said that he was sorry for what he did, but he really truly never took the accountability for it, and never, 5 years is simply not much time to have passed. And sure enough, we found out that his behavior had continued. So I think that these are these tough conversations that we're going to be having, out and that we should be having as we're changing as a society. Lots of people, men in particular, have committed these acts that were tolerated by society for so long and are not anymore. So, if they're changing their behavior now, what do we do with what they did in the past?
Yeah, I think it's just so, it struck me every time it came up in the book that you were like, yeah, I also did something wrong, and just so straightforward acknowledging it is so powerful and is so meaningful. And it is done so little by the men in these positions.
Right. I mean, like that's the part that just kind of blows my mind. It's like, you can be wrong. You can say that I screwed up and I'm sorry, and I want to make things better. And I don't know if that's a masculine ego kind of thing that makes it so much more difficult for men. But I have to think it must be, at least partially, or it might be because we have just let them get away with it for so long, or that society, not we as women, but just society as a whole has not expected good behavior from men, or has not expected apologies, or has, allowed them to, to kind of brush it off as like, in the same way that we've had this boys will be boys mentality for kids. I think we've had these, men will be men. You almost expect men to cheat and to do these things that are, when women do something similar, are considered abhorrent and, sort of give you a scarlet letter.
I like that. And I think that's what's missing so often from the discussion, especially in the right wing of quote unquote cancel culture. This idea of, but what's, what if people make a mistake? Are you going to cancel them for it? I feel like what is often missed is that the cancellation is, in my experience, usually because the person refuses to take responsibility for what they did in the past, or lies about what they did in the past, or, victim blames for what they did in the past. And I feel like that is a nuance that is often overlooked in discussion of what they call cancel culture.
I agree. And, I think about, and it's hard. It's not easy for us to kind of decide when somebody commits a forgivable act, or how you're supposed to take responsibility. And even I ask these questions in the book, like, I know that there are some people who are rightfully so still upset with me, even though I did resign, who wants some kind of, who want more accountability or responsibility. And I ask, and I genuinely mean this, what can I do? And I know that I shouldn't be putting the responsibility on anyone else to try and figure out what the right thing is to do. But I think it's a question we should all be asking ourselves, because it's certainly one that I'm asking myself. And I guess the only answer I've come up with is to try to do something positive with it. And, knowing that my resignation has had an impact on people and certainly on myself. It was something that I of course didn't want to resign, but it also has had reverberating impacts. We lost that seat that I'd flipped. I hope we get it back in November. So I feel a great deal of responsibility for so many things. And I think that the only way I can live with myself is by trying to divert it into my energy into something positive.
You talk a lot about how it would be great if women not just had a sort of equal representation at this point, but actually just were in charge of everything for a while, which I completely agree with. And we're not there. We're not going to get there, but we at least now have a woman as a vice president candidate from your home state in California. How do we talk about this, though, that women should be in charge of more? People are always throwing back this, that's identity politics. Mm-hmm. And, how do we frame this messaging in a way to make it clear that look, no, we should be putting women in charge because they have had different experiences. And that's not just identity politics, whatever that means.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think that's I've sort of been defined in the way that I've been talking about it, is that like I'm sick of the the whole concept of, you shouldn't vote for a woman because she's a woman, or, you don't want to vote for somebody just because of their identity. And of course, it's not just because of that. But my point is that if a woman has reached the level that, of running for office, of being considered a serious candidate, of whatever she's had to accomplish in her life to get to that point, then she's probably more qualified than the guys that she's running against anyway, just because of the double standards that we've had to face throughout our entire existence. And so, I like to say that we should vote for women because they're women, and that we shouldn't shy away from that, because it does bring a diversity of experience and a different way of governing, and a different way of collaborating and of leading, and we need to aggressively make strides in trying to turn over who holds the power. If we're ever going to get to 50%, if we're ever going to even get to parity, then we're going to have to do it with intentionality. And I'm even asking allies, men who are allies, instead of, insisting on being the candidate yourself, can you support a woman who is? Can you, if you're this guy who's wanted to be in politics forever, what about your wife? Like, she could she be better at this than you? And I think that there's a real, and by the way, I'm saying this because several of the men that I was in Congress with, like, I got to know their wives too. And I'm like, you guys would be so much better than your husbands. And sometimes they are behind the scenes, but I just wish that they, that they were the ones who were in front. I think about Gavin Newsom, and I don't get me wrong. He's my governor. I love him, but his wife, Jennifer Seibel Newsom, is just incredible. And I'm like, I just wish she was, he was the first man, and she was the principal. But I think that's really the messaging around it should be that, look, this isn't identity politics. We are half of the population, and all we want is equal representation. We just want half of, we're not saying that men should be gone. We're not saying that they shouldn't have a say at all, but we're saying that you've had the say for, thousands of years, and it's time for us. Clearly it's not working. It's time for us to have a little bit of a change. And the evidence, the research backs it up that, women in leadership positions, or when you have a large enough percentage of women in governance, in different kinds of legislative bodies, it makes a true impact. Women send more money back to their districts. They've done better. I think this was just published that the response to COVID has been better that are led by women. And, I think there's situation after situation like that, some of which I detail in the book.
All right. So speaking of the book, how do our listeners get the book?
Sure. So you can go to shewillrisebook.com, and it gives you all the different places that you can buy it. We've got audio, we've got ebook, we've got print. Is there any other format? I think that's it. I feel like that's all the formats, right? But it gives you all the different vendors that you can buy it from. And, obviously it's on all the big ones, Amazon included. And if people want to follow the PAC too, that's a really important one. And that's her-time.com.
And we'll put links to those on our website as well. I love that you did the audiobook yourself. I am a big fan of audiobooks because I can do things like work out at the same time and,
do other things.
Do those things that working moms do. So I love audiobooks anyway. And I think, having it in your own voice makes it even that much more meaningful. So I'm really glad that you did the audiobook yourself.
Yeah, that was an interesting experience too. I'm glad that I did it as well.
Are you still in touch with your friends from Congress? I know you were roommates with Lauren Underwood, who's been a longtime friend of the podcast.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, I'm in touch with a lot of them. And, I live primarily in DC still. So, I guess still is the right word. And so when they were coming back a lot, I was getting together with them, and I got to, with some of DC doing a bit better with COVID than California is, or a lot better, I guess, than California is. And so we had dinner outside and things like that. So it's, there's still, it's sort of like serving in the trenches of some kind when, it's very difficult to kind of explain what it's like to serve if you haven't been in there. And so there's just something nice about, that camaraderie and And, we did, even though it was a short time, we did become close friends. So I'm grateful for that.
Yeah. Well, I still remember where I was when I heard that you were resigning. I know some people are like, they remember where they were when JFK was killed or something. I remember where I was when I heard you were resigning. But I completely understand and respect the decision that you made. And I'm so thrilled that you wrote this book. Like I said, it's just really, really incredible. And so thank you for being on with us today. And thank you for using the voice that you have. I saw you tweeted the other day that some of your friends in Congress say, you get to speak so much more now that you're out. So I'm glad you're using that for good.
Yeah, you're just a little less restricted. Thank you. I appreciate it. You got to take the perks where they come. One of them is sleeping in. The other is being able to say whatever you want.
Well, Katie, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
We will put links to the book and the PAC up on our website, so I hope everyone will check that out. And everyone who chose to listen to this instead of watching the RNC convention, very good choice.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you for listening to Two Broads Talking Politics, part of the Dimcast Podcast Network. Our theme song is called Are You Listening? Off of the album Elephant Shaped Trees by the band Immunuri, and we're using it with permission of the band. Our logo and other original artwork is by Matthew Weflin and was created for use by this podcast. You can contact us at twobroadstalkingpolitics@gmail.com or on Twitter or Facebook at Two Broads Talk. You can find all of our episodes at twobroadstalkingpolitics.com or anywhere podcasts are found.